Welcome back. All right. All right, so we have our speaker series portion now. And this part is really to kind of ferment and make clear some topics and issues that affect mental health. And we're hoping to just offer some information and also some community resources and contacts that you can look further into. So, yeah. So, first off, we would like to thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone here would say the same. I'm just guessing, I don't know. So you were each chosen to speak because your personal experiences, interests, or profession touches on some of the many issues within the field of mental health. All right, so let's begin with Aisha Sebright. Aisha was born and raised in Toronto, Canada. She's a trauma survivor, student, freelance illustrator, and mental health advocate. Her topics tonight include trauma as a Black individual, stigma, and lack of support regarding mental health in the Caribbean community, seeking treatment, and being an ally in mental health. So please welcome Aisha.
All right, thanks for having me. Like Jenna said, my name's Aisha Sebright. I am bringing my own experience to the stage right now as a Jamaican woman born in Canada, first generation. So I was raised by parents who were born in Jamaica, and so they are raised under that culture. And so that brings a whole different context to my upbringing and my experiences. In the Caribbean community, mental health is looked at as a curse and something of an omen, something that you wish upon yourself or that you deserve or that you can exercise as an actual exorcism and things like that. So it's taboo to talk about it. And within the community, it's hard for people to actually give space for others who are suffering with mental health, at least in the Caribbean community. I by no means represent all Black people at all. Black people are not a monolith. I'm only going to speak on my particular experience. So with that being said, sorry, it's just really bright up here. So I can't really see any faces and connect with people when I normally have conversation, which would make this a much easier experience, but I'm still gonna do it. So with that happening, thank you. So with that going on, what happens is a lot of people of Caribbean descent face traumas within just their culture. And it kind of forces you to repress what you're experiencing. So with my personal experience, with mental illness, pretty much what it is that in Caribbean culture, especially Jamaican culture, you're supposed to be someone who's strong. You're supposed to be someone who doesn't falter. And if you show any signs of weakness, then it's your own fault and you're not looked upon with empathy and tolerance. And I believe why that is because oftentimes, because you're raised in a culture that's like a warrior culture, where you're supposed to always put out a brave front, what happens is they repress their own anxiety and depression and whatever illness they deal with, and therefore they don't show the same tolerance when others exhibit those symptoms, just because they believe that everyone should be able to repress it the way they do themselves. Another way that there is a lack of support for I would say people of color, but especially Black individuals, is that when you're seeking help, people of authority tend to look at Black people as less innocent, as more deserving of whatever they're dealing with. Studies have shown that teachers actually look at Black children as perpetrators more than victims. Like, even if you look at statistics, children within preschools and that are expelled for exhibiting the same behaviors as their white or non-Black people of color counterparts exhibit. And it's a dangerous mentality, especially just growing up when people around you are like, oh, don't take that child home because they're Black, I don't want them in my home. And just all those layers of microaggression and direct racism and unintentional racism build up, and it forms all these calloused scars that you're not sure how to deal with, and there often isn't a language to deal with it, especially if you're coming from a Caribbean background, because there isn't a dialogue for that oftentimes. It's not to say it's always going to be like that, and right now it is actually, we're at a great time for mental health and being a Black person. There's so many online groups, there's so much support. Now it's now becoming like more acceptable to be vulnerable and to talk about this. But definitely there's still changes that need to be made. For me, when I was seeking help through therapy, oftentimes I felt like therapists that I would see would be often dismissive of what I was experiencing, chalking it up to, oh, you just need to take this prescription, and like not really offering like counseling help, like to sort out my problems. And I feel like that is something that other Black people face often as well, just because, like I said, there's this archetype that if you're Black, you're more aggressive. Oh, there's this strong Black woman or angry Black woman archetype that you can handle anything, and that like even in a medical field, doctors, a lot of professionals believe that Black people can handle more pain than people who are non-Black and people who are white even. There's no justification other than like colonialism has left these lingering traces within even medicinal practices to show, and that just shows that there is no place really that is exempt from bias and prejudice as well. But yeah, but a way to combat this is to be more empathetic. If you'd like to be an ally to people of color, especially Black people, note that we experience triggers and anxiety and depression, but sometimes we'll display different symptoms. We won't necessarily, like if someone is aggressive, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're angry at you per se, or that they're looking to harm you. That's just could be a reaction to a trigger that they've experienced. And from experiencing so many microaggressions so often throughout life, it can be really easy to be triggered by someone unintentionally being racist. So what I would say is be a bit humble. Maybe check yourself for what you might have said, or maybe some body language that you might have shown that might have reminded someone of like harmful experiences they haven't had in the past, and have an open mind, I suppose. And yeah, that rambling speech is pretty much it.
All right, so our next speaker is, first of all, thank you so much. That was great. Our next speaker is Hepzibeth, who is a social worker student. Oh, the light was okay. Social worker student at the University of Victoria, who focuses primarily on youth mental health in Indigenous and East Asian Canadian communities. Most recently, her work has taken her to northern Quebec, working with Cree First Nations youth in Eastman and Nemaska. Using interviews conducted for her undergraduate thesis, Hepzibeth is at the beginning stages of co-writing a play on intergenerational mental health stigma and the model minority myth.
All right, thanks, Jenna. So when I heard Jenna's call out, or when I read it on Facebook, I felt like I kind of met a lot of the criteria of being able to speak on personal experiences, but also how mental health has like really been a common thread in a lot of my work. So I guess tonight I'm going to share a bit about my own experiences with mental health or mental health disorder, and my work as a social worker. So I guess specifically for a lot of Asian Canadians, a lot of the times there's an expectation to be a model minority. So that term kind of is a stereotype of being like hardworking and law-abiding and getting a really good education. And that's not just for Asian Canadians. I think that's kind of an expectation for a lot of immigrant children, to be like doctors or lawyers or engineers. And I think what that does is that it perpetuates this expectation of being highly productive and having that work be really effortless. So I think a lot of Asian Canadians end up emotionally disconnecting to be able to meet that expectation from their parents. And for me, school was that distraction. Growing up, I experienced a loss at a very young age. My sister had passed away very suddenly when she was 15, and I was expected to take care of my mom. And so I just put myself purely into my work, and it was like a very effective coping mechanism for many, many years, until I realized like that's not what I wanted to do, and I started to feel very apathetic about it. And it wasn't until I started talking about it with friends that I didn't feel the same joys I did before, that I realized like it was not somewhere I wanted to be for the long run. And I think what's particular about seeking help for people who feel like they need to be the model minority is that sometimes it's a double bind because you're seen as too functional. So I would go to like the counselors or the emergency room or hotlines, and because I was seemingly doing well, it seemed that I was too functional to get help. And it's really unfortunate that our healthcare system does this, because it means that we have to be in imminent crisis to get help, and that's a very dangerous place to be in. And so I think what it does is you learn to put your story in a nutshell and to be as comprehensible as you can for doctors. And even then you might not get help right away. And I think that's something that really that we really need to work on. Yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think also something that needs to be worked on in our healthcare system is that we're becoming, especially in the Canadian mental health care system, we're becoming more culturally aware. But I think in my practice I'm learning the difference between just being culturally aware and being culturally informed. So being culturally aware would be like noticing the different cultural differences of each culture, but I think what we need to recognize is not just these differences, but that there's a dynamic between the client and the person giving care, so like the therapist or the counselor, and oftentimes counselors aren't people who reflect us, or like there aren't as many people of color who are doing the therapy, and there's a lot of shame in that, in sharing the difficult family dynamics, and exposing like the dirty laundry, and so I think where even if services are accessible, they aren't necessarily as accessible for people of color or for first or second generation immigrants. Yeah, so I think we need to recognize that that we might be receiving different messages at home, and so it's even harder to come out as struggling with mental illness. I think another thing that can be worked on is recognizing that if second or third generation people are seeking mental health care, they're often the first ones in their families to be doing so. And so they're sharing they're unpacking a lot of trauma and a lot of histories of pain, really. And so counselors do need to understand the specificities of that trauma, and that it takes a huge step to be the torchbearers of that. Yeah, I think that's all my notes say, so thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jillian, I guess I'll say it.
Some last names. It's
Hello? All right, so I have your last name, so I'll say it. So Jillian Ricci is an avid mental health advocate, currently working as the Community Outreach Coordinator for AMI Quebec, which is Action on Mental Illness. Sorry. She is passionate about connecting and educating organizations in Montreal. She is also the co-founder of Lead With Your Heart, an organization that raises awareness and funds for creative art therapy programs for mental health and addictions.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, everyone. It's really an honor for me to be here and to be included in this panel with amazing people with really, really insightful information to share, and also to share the stage with a bunch of awesome performers. I know that we're still going to see a lot more great things, so thank you, everyone. As Jenna mentioned, I work as the outreach coordinator for AMI Quebec. It's a community organization here in Montreal where we serve primarily caregivers and family members of people who are experiencing mental illness. We know that these challenges go beyond just the individual, that it can really affect the circle of care. And a big part of my job is to just educate people and to begin this conversation. We all know that mental health and mental illness can be a very scary subject. I think a lot of fear just stems from what we don't know and what we don't understand. So I really believe in creating the conversation and breaking the walls. This is not a job that I got into through academics. It's not something I studied. I have a background in the arts and in business, and it was really my own personal experiences that brought me into the world of mental health. When I was 17, I started experiencing panic attacks. I started having really bad anxiety, and it led into depression. It was something that I managed and dealt with all throughout my young life. It didn't really affect me too much until I moved to San Francisco to start my MBA. And it was there that really anxiety tore my life apart. I ended up being hospitalized. I couldn't pursue my academic dreams, and my ego was completely crushed. And when I came home after, losing sight of pretty much everything that was important to me, I felt like I really had to kind of reset things and figure out what I was meant to do. At the same time, I had a partner who was struggling with his own mental health issues, and it led into some addictions issues, which I was around for all the time. It was something that our social lives turned into sort of something more consuming. And he and I had been tango dancers. This was something that we had started doing a number of years ago, something we always enjoyed doing. And it was through the most challenging times that we found dance was an amazing outlet for us. It was something that we could connect with others when we went out and we danced with people. It was like a silent conversation that we could have with other people. And also by doing it for mental health, it just started that conversation because people would approach us, and just knowing that we were sharing something that was very intimate and close to us, that sort of helped them identify, because our emotions are a very human struggle, and whether you have challenges with mental health or not, it's something that we have to keep our mental health into perspective every single day, just like we keep our physical selves in check. You know, we get up, we shower, we brush our teeth, we eat, usually. And, you know, these are things that we have to kind of keep our mental health in check as well. So the dancing led to the creation of Lead With Your Heart. This is where we started fundraising for art therapy programs for mental health and addictions. Sadly, Lucas passed away from his addictions issues, and it was a terrible thing in my life, a huge loss at 30. It was something I was not equipped to deal with, really. On top of having to deal with my own anxiety and depression, it was just a lot. So I decided to restart things, and I moved to Montreal a couple years ago, and Lead With Your Heart has continued to be a passion project of mine. When I first moved and I started working here, it was through that passion that really led me to this job with AMI Quebec. It was just simply having conversations with other people who were like-minded and who knew that this conversation is not just important, it's imperative to have, and that we have to share it. And I think that building solidarity through sharing experiences is an excellent way to start. And again, that's why I really want to congratulate everyone who's stood up on this stage to share your vulnerabilities and to connect with each one of us. It's just so important. So my job at AMI Quebec has been an amazing way for me to share my experiences and to motivate other people, and just to connect with other people on a very human level. As I mentioned, we're an organization that really exists primarily for caregivers and family members. So we offer counseling, we have support groups, which are mixed groups open to caregivers and people who have mental illness themselves. We also have workshops, we have an incredible website that's full of resources. And I also brought a lot of information because I know that you're probably receiving a lot of information, but on the table there's lots of pamphlets and information about AMI Quebec, about our upcoming fall schedule. And I encourage you to, you know, if you're struggling, or if you have a family member who is struggling and you're just looking for someone to speak to or looking to have a conversation with someone, please, as many people have said, reach out. I know that the system is not perfect. I know as a community organization, we try to support what the public system can't, but really the only way we're going to do that is to do it all together. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me onto this panel, and I hope an awesome discussion follows.
Thank you. All right, so Shauna is a 40-something-year-old horticulturist, gardener, queer, lyricist, and musician. She'll be reading her poems and talking about issues, experiences, and what has helped her through mental illness. She has a lot of experience using mental health services.
Thanks, Jen.
Bravo.
Thanks for being here. It's been a great night. I want to share my 4 poems with you. I believe they say more than I could in regular speech. So I wanted to say as little as possible in my talking to you and let the poems speak for themselves. I'll give you some background before each poem. Hopefully I found the right balance. I'll start off giving you a dry little summary of my history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. And I'll get better, hopefully. I've been generally steered away from telling people my diagnoses by my excellent psychologist, because saying I'm this or I'm that is defining yourself by your illness. Here, though, I feel it is appropriate to name them, in spite of this being such a public affair. ADD at 23, small-time depression, bipolar at 26, schizoaffective at 27, full-blown depression. This is going to be tricky for me, I think. Microphone. Thanks, that's really nice of you. Full-blown depression and anxiety. Here's a list of my formal engagements since my bipolar diagnosis and my first hospitalization. Outpatient classes, including a creativity course, awesome. Concordia stagehand demoted to usher, volunteering for an elderly residence called Maimonides. Outpatient program at MGH, cognitive behavioral therapy, classes at the English Montreal School Board and John Abbott, Mission Bon Accueil, sorting clothes and store worker, yoga classes, Douglas Greenhouse's Pass Action, Mission Bon Accueil, Botanical Gardens DEP program in horticulture, graduating from a psychiatric doctors and nurses, and some jobs in my field of horticulture, and added later, so this is out of time order, from the Art of Living, I took courses in yoga wisdom, yoga, art of silence, and an AOL Introduction to Wisdom course, as well as at the Impassion doing music therapy and improv group, and their band, the Big Bang Band. Just to tell you what a wreck I was, briefly though, at my lowest I was in a mental hell, suicidal, I actually tried, and it took a lot of reconstruction because I was missing so much. Depression is the most miserable condition. On the positive side now, before illness, I got a great education, including a BA from Brandeis in Women and Health, and completed the pre-med program. I'd worked in a couple of professional jobs in research lab and as a teacher, though I didn't have any career direction after that. I'm almost at the end of this summary here. I played and studied music in elementary school and in high school, and with a private teacher, and I performed live a couple times in university. And I found my instrument, the bass, though inspiration was limited. So this next poem is a prayer. It's called The Cloud. I describe my some experiences with mental illness. The cloud, out of the nebulous vast of a sick mind into new vision. That's the title. A cloud that has blocked the light of confidence shining over my prime years, dulling emotional life, slowing down mental activity, draining energy, distortions out of self-absorption, leaving me floating painfully in the darkness. God, help my view shift to see a different colored light, directing me towards insight and vitality, to find a comfortable sense of I with the right vision. The next poem is Beautiful Patterns, which is about art. Illness is what brought me to being committedly creative. It was the beginning of my turnaround. Art helped me build myself. Poetry gave me direction. Through poetry, I articulated my own inner wisdom I didn't know I had, and I kept learning from it. I made sense with it. Playing music gave me a voice. I could touch people with my playing and songwriting, and I found my voice was clever and it had style. Sculpting was a lot about the process and having something I made be an object of beauty and in its depth of meaning. dance, so powerful, was an exploration of self, a discovery, an emotional trip, a finding and developing of integrity and self-assuredness, and personality integration. My art was so important because without the creations of depth, I was empty, feeling utterly unproductive, uncreative, ineffective, disconnected from myself and others, mentally inert. Beautiful patterns. Silence is loving. Spirit hums, amusing, bouncing off the walls. Subtlety moving us inside and out. Art with blissful intentions. Presence recognizing limits. Space for sadness, humility, for work, for creation. Vision to sculpt with elegant simplicity. And complex fun, twisting, turning, interesting, and leaving, dropping, letting go. The next poem is I Walk to the Gardens. This poem is about building my life up through work and through the power of people connections with a certain person in particular, a woman I loved and adored, to whom I wrote this poem. Meeting her was a turning point for me. I want to make a slew of points here, which I think are super important. That recovery is about building our lives. It's a creative endeavor that we grow and evolve naturally, whether we're conscious of it or not. And that witnessing our growth, seeing the little improvements, we may be encouraged. We may find hope, capital H. Recovery is about taking baby steps. It was she who introduced me to the art of living, Ashram International, and my guru, a great guide and source of spirituality, wisdom, and love. One thing I didn't talk about in the poem, I love to spread the word about how powerful meditation and yoga are at building our bodies, minds, hearts, spirit, and character. And it's how to best get to know ourselves, which is what it's all about, eh? I worked in the gardens. I walked in the gardens. The lighting's not great. I walked. I used to prefer to ride. Cutting through air rich with sounds, feeding me, pulling, knowing that somehow they belonged in my world without regard for their instrument. Most of us are sensors, following the light which leads us in one direction. I was blinded by staring at the brightest for too long, not realizing there are so many smaller but equal ones. Like a plant in a compost heap, I couldn't find downwards so that I could take root in my rich surroundings. I went to work in the gardens to tend to the empty spaces that needed to grow, and there I met you a few times over, a healer and chef of a gardener. You are a cultivateur and extraordinaire, a wild cat and a hopeful bird. You brought a dormant rodent to life with your song. Because the beauty in your light was felt strongly, and I could hold it in both my hands. It was aimed in my direction. You caught my attention like a dream, and then I followed, trusting your beaming eyes. And your joyful heart would guide us to dancing away with the delicious treats of our creation, the fruit of our friendship. This last poem is called To Know Her, a Feminist View. I seek to empower with this poem. It touches on identity and personality. I'm suggesting there's a richness, a purpose that extreme experiences, be it mania or psychosis, can give us. It's a feminist view because it speaks to a common practice in 19th century Western society of diagnosing women with hysteria, or what we call madness, denying them, fearing them, and in extreme cases, casting them out of society into asylums. 1/4 of women at the time were said to have hysteria. These problems continue today. The stigma, the denying, the fear of people with mental health conditions. This is nothing new to any of us. I'm looking to legitimize our extreme mental health experiences as being worthy of analysis or understanding and inclusion in our self-definition. To know her, a feminist view. It's interesting to know what she wears when she arrives at the point where darkness and moral rigor and a given extreme emotion meet. To bring her to ecstasy, madness or awakening, to know her. The economics of language, line of credit and window to the soul, appearance is everything to one who can see. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. Our last speaker is Liz Singh. Liz Singh is a street worker for Head and Hands. She works primarily with youth and with drug users. Head and Hands' mission is to work with youth to promote their physical and mental well-being. Their approach is preventative, inclusive, non-judgmental, and holistic, with a fundamental commitment to providing an environment that welcomes youth without discrimination.
Thank you so much. So my name is my name is Liz, and I'm a street worker at Head and Hands. And what that means is street work is a form of outreach work with a focus on harm reduction. And what harm reduction is, and this is at the core of Head and Hands' mission, is an approach to health that centers individual choice and focuses on non-judgment. It removes a lot of the moral elements and tries to focus on people choosing for themselves. So what I want to talk to you about today a little bit is the relationship between drugs and mental health. And it's obviously like a really big conversation, so I won't cover all there is to say on it. But I want to talk to you a little bit about this, especially in the context of the ongoing overdose crisis in Canada, which I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with, but right now in Canada and the US, we're facing a much higher than normal number of overdoses on opioids. And that is basically like a public health crisis, very comparable to the AIDS crisis in the 80s and 90s. At this point, more people have died in Vancouver from overdose than died of AIDS at the height of the AIDS crisis. So it's a really big deal. So I'm talking specifically about opioids, but I feel like a big part of our movement and our advocacy is focusing on the idea that we are, most of us, drug users in some way, shape, or form, whether we use drugs that are legal or illegal, or even that are recognized as drugs. This is a common behavior. So I want to talk to you about a couple of things that I think we should be doing sort of socially in response to this situation. The first one is ending the war on drugs. So decriminalizing and destigmatizing drug use in our society, whether it be for illness, for mental illness, or for recreation, allowing people to make their own choices and not be treated as criminals for doing so. The war on drugs leads people to use drugs in isolation and with a great sense of shame, and that often increases their risk of overdose, of using drugs that are not what they think they are. And then when they do want to seek help or reduce their use, it makes it much, much harder to do so. And lastly, it's simply been ineffective. It's been an extremely expensive experiment in trying to shame people into what the government thinks of as healthier choices. Which I think is a pretty awful approach. So in the interim, some of the things that we're doing, because the Trudeau government, while they're super excited to legalize marijuana, they are not as excited to end the war on drugs altogether. We've been distributing naloxone, which is something that I hope you've heard about in your communities. Naloxone is an opioid blocker. It can block overdoses from happening. It's like an EpiPen for overdosing on opioids. So that is a product that we are using in response to this crisis and trying to make as accessible as possible to the public. The other thing is opening overdose prevention sites. We are about to open one in NDG, and those are places where people can come and use drugs, and they will not be arrested for doing so. And if they overdose on site, there will be somebody there to keep an eye on them. And if they need new gear, that's also a place that they can get that. And lastly, testing strips. Everyone right now who's in Montreal who is using any drug that comes in the form of a pill or a powder, it would be a useful safety measure to pursue testing sources. The third thing on my list is accessible health resources. We've talked a lot about stigma tonight, and one thing that drug users face a lot when they're trying to access health resources, be those doctors, social workers, therapists, hospitals, almost anybody really, are super biased against drug users. And again, that leads to shame and isolation, which doesn't necessarily help people make healthier choices. When I talk about accessibility, I'm talking about accessibility on a number of levels. Financially, in terms of where these resources are located, countries out in the country versus in the city, for example, or even on, only in particular neighborhoods, accessible for people who speak different languages, accessible for people from different cultures. These are all things that our healthcare system is not currently, and it has a super large impact on drug users. The last thing on my list is covering basic needs. Where drug use and substance dependence encounter poverty, that leads to even more stress for people. So the more that we can move towards things like minimum income and affordable housing, the easier it will be for us to address this crisis. More Canadians than ever are living in food insecurity, and living with poverty and the practical ramifications of poverty does nothing to help people recover from mental illness. In fact, it exacerbates it. The final need that I want to talk to you about is, I don't know, sorry, like slightly interactive moment. Has everybody heard about Rat Park?
What's that?
Do we know? Okay. Thank you, participating audience member. So Rat Park was an experiment in the 70s by a Canadian scientist, Bruce Alexander, who had a hypothesis that the ways that we were testing drugs were not actually effective. So the way that we used to test the addictiveness of, say, a substance like cocaine was to put two rats in two different cages, and one rat would have plain water and the other rat would have Coke water. But there was nothing else in the cages. And the result that people would get over and over again is that the rat in the Coke cage would keep going back to the little water dropper with the Coke in it. And we interpreted that to mean that Coke was super, super addictive. But Bruce Alexander did his own experiment where he put some rats in a cage with some cocaine, but he also put in a whole bunch of other rats. And he put in toys for them to climb on, and he put in little places for them to take naps. And he found that those rats were no more interested in the cocaine than they were in the water. And humans operate very much the same way. When we have connection and community and food and sex, we are less likely to enter into destructive relationships with substances. So yeah, that is my super quick and nervous list of things that we can be doing to support people who are dealing with mental health and addiction. And I guess my ask coming out of this is that if any part of this seemed interesting to you around harm reduction or what we can do to end prohibition, then I hope that you continue to educate yourselves and vote accordingly. I think that we are in a really interesting moment where this war could end within our generation, and it's within the power of people like us to do so, and in so doing, bring a lot of help to a lot of people who need it. Yeah.
Thank you.
That was all so interesting, and that was so much information. Maybe you can all, since it's like been a long night and we've gotten all so much information, could all of you maybe give some form of contact if you have, or some contact that's not you that people can do further research with or reach out for support? If anyone does, you can take the mic and pass it here.
Sure, I'll go ahead. You can actually, and I encourage you to give this number to young people in your community who might need it, especially in MDG, sorry. But my street work number is 514-808-1312. That's 514-808-1312. You can also find me on the Head and Hands website or on Facebook.
I don't know. I could leave my my card at that back table.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that has my texting number. That's a good way to contact me.
I would encourage all of you guys to pick up some information on the way out of AMI Quebec. Our website is www.amiquebec.org. There's lots of awesome information. There's also phone numbers on there. And if you're interested in the Lead With Your Heart project, you can check it out on Facebook at Lead With Your Heart Tango or online at lwyh.org.
So I guess it would just be my Facebook, which can be linked through the CJLO event page. Yeah.
All right, so as well, same for me. You can link me through Facebook. Also, I might have not connected the information as well as I could have just because of nerves, etc. Also, you could also get more information and participate in matters for Black people through Black Lives Matter Montreal. I'm not officially affiliated or personally affiliated or anything, but they have a lot of information on how to be a better ally.
Thank you. So we could do a question and answer period if anyone has any questions to ask, or if you have any questions for the audience. Now's your time.
Okay.
I feel like you just have to think of questions and it always takes a moment.
Jenna, this might be a good time to mention that after the question and answer period, we'll be bringing the collective band on.
Yes, after the question and answer period, thank you, Sheila. That's very true. We're going to do the last band, which is the band that helped start this whole thing. There's a show on CJLO that I and Grills over there help out with, and it's called the Audio Pen Pals, and we have a few of them here tonight. We have one host, Jerry, over there. And we have Peter, which I'm not sure where Peter is, but he's probably somewhere. He's in back, cool. So the show is basically, it's hosted by people of different abilities, and it is a platform for them to speak on any topic that they would like to, and it gives them that space, and it's a learning experience for everyone, learning how to run sound systems and the radio, and it's really cool. And so they had an idea to create music, and so we put together a band, and we just reached out and recruited people who wanted to use music to talk about their own personal mental state in any form. And we found these amazing people who, I can say one of them is up here, Shauna. Shauna is our bassist. And we have Sheila over there. This is funny. And we have Grills, who is our flute player. Okay. Nicole, it's a big band. And we have Fenton in back, all the way in back. And who am I missing? Emmanuel, who is over there. Yeah, and Grills. And so they recorded in 3 months an EP, and it's going to be out to purchase soon. And they're going to play you some songs after this. And they're the reason this is happening. their dedication and passion, and we really hope you stay and you watch them, and you can just see how many people reached out about this event. Clearly it's something that we all care about, and I hope it continues, and I hope people are creative with their expression, and it's a good way to start conversation and make people feel like they can say what they want to say. So yeah, anything else anyone else wants to say? Oh, we're good? Cool. All right, well, thank you all so much.
Yes.